Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Madeline Milka, President and CEO of APAICS, the Asian Pacific American Institute for Congressional Studies. Welcome to today's APAICS in Conversation. We are thrilled to have with us as an interviewer Bijal Vakil, a partner in the Silicon Valley office of White & Case, where he advises leading technology companies. Widely recognized by legal professionals as an authority in his field, Bijal serves as the executive partner of the Silicon Valley office for nearly a decade and founded the firm's Taiwan practice. He is an active member of the firm's Global Technology Industry Group and is chair of the firm's U.S. Diversity Committee. Active in the API community, Bijal has served in leadership positions at Napaba and Saba. And today's special guest is the Honorable Michelle K. Lee, who is a Vice President of Amazon Web Services Machine Learning Solutions Lab, where she leads a global team that focuses on Amazon's cloud-based artificial intelligence and machine learning solutions. Prior to that, Michelle was the Herman Fleischer Visiting Professor at Stanford Law School, where she taught on disruptive technologies, including artificial intelligence and driverless cars. She also served as the Undersecretary of Commerce for Intellectual Property and Director of the United States Patent and Trademark Office, one of the largest intellectual property offices in the world. In this role, she was the chief executive of a 13,000-person agency with a budget of $3.4 billion and was the principal advisor to the administration on intellectual property policy. She is the first woman to serve as director in the country's 220-plus-year history and is an advocate for women and girls in STEM. If you're joining us on Facebook, please be sure to put your questions in the comment section, and if you're on the webinar, in the Q&A chat. Please join us today for APAICS in Conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Madeline, for the kind introduction. I'm thrilled to be here and to have a chance to have an informal discussion with the Honorable Michelle Lee. And thanks to everyone at the Asian Pacific American Congressional Studies Institute for giving us the opportunity and the chance to have this discussion today. So Michelle, we've known each other a long time, but I'd like to hear a little bit more. Tell us the story of Michelle Lee. And did you ever think that your career would take this path?
Well, thank you very much, Bijal. And I too want to thank APAICS and Madeline for having me here today and for the important work that APAICS does. Yes, Bijal, we have known each other for quite a while. And to answer your question, I never would have predicted that my career would take the path that it took with its many twists and turns. I was born and raised in the Silicon Valley. And as a kid, I had a passion for ballet, climbing trees, and making and building things. And I grew up in a house where tinkering was the norm. My dad was an engineer, and as a girl, we built a handheld radio together, and I later helped him build the TV that sat in our living room. And I just sort of thought that's what all girls did. Little did I know that that was not quite true. I also grew up on a street where all the dads were engineers, and back then it was just dads who were engineers. It was not uncommon for them to invent something, to file for a patent, to obtain funding, and to start a company. Some of these companies succeeded, some did not, but for a few that did, they really revolutionized the world, creating good paying jobs and economic opportunities for their local communities. So that left a very powerful impression on me. And I wanted to be a part of that creation and innovation, so I went off to engineering school. And then after that,
go ahead.
Okay, so then after that, I went off to engineering school, and then I was in the PhD program in computer science. And I don't know if you remember this, Bijal, but the Apple versus Microsoft case was going on in the courts. And the issue there was to what extent and whether copyright protected the graphical user interface that Apple had popularized with the icons and the scroll bars and the trash cans. And what I realized was that courts were deciding novel issues presented by technologies that had broad impact on society, in this case, the incentives to innovate and to create, and there were no answers in the case law. So I was attracted to the opportunity to help shape laws in a manner that would encourage the innovations that our society wants to have. And that led me to law school, then to private practice, and later on in-house at Google. So that's how I ended up in that position. And then after that, go ahead.
I was just going to say, sorry to interrupt, but we're all here today to learn about Asian Pacific Americans getting roles into government. How did you move from Google to getting into one of the highest levels of the US government?
Well, if you had asked me when I was in the Silicon Valley if I ever thought that one day I'd be running the US Patent and Trademark Office, I would have said no. But as you progress in your career and you become very good at what you do, people reach out to you and they seek your opinion and advice. And because of my business and technical background combined with the substantive expertise that I had, the administration was interested in my thoughts on what was needed to support innovation that is so important to our country, that they wanted to maintain and to encourage. So they appreciated the thoughtfulness of my input, and I was asked if I would be willing to serve, first as Deputy Undersecretary of Commerce, then later on as the Undersecretary of Commerce and Director of the US Patent and Trademark Office. And I do believe that when and if your country or president asks you to serve and you share in the mission and you are at all able to do so, you do. We cannot take for granted that the institutions, values, and liberties that we've enjoyed in the past will continue unless good, talented people with diverse talents and perspectives are willing to step aside from what they may be doing to serve. And so when I was asked to serve, I said yes. And I guess I would encourage all of our listeners to consider whether and how you might serve, whether it be in elected or appointed positions, or even in public interest. And that's why the work of groups such as APAICS are so important, because it helps a broader range of individuals contribute in this manner.
That's quite a journey, one that all of us envy. What's your role now at Amazon Web Services?
Well, now I'm back on the business and technology side. I am the Vice President of the Machine Learning Solutions Lab, where I lead a global business and a large team whose mission is to help solve organizations' most challenging problems through artificial intelligence and machine learning. And I did my graduate work at the MIT AI lab. I'm not going to say how many decades ago, but unlike then, the technology is now ripe for transformation in carefully selected use cases. And I have the opportunity to work with organizations, both in the private and the public sector, to help them do just this.
So you've had a number of interesting jobs in the private sector and the public sector, and now back in the private sector. I mean, each career that you've had so far would be a stellar end. So to all of our listeners out there, what's the one piece of advice that you would give someone? What's the one thing that you've learned?
Well, many things. I learned different things from each of those roles. Each role was very rewarding, but if you were to ask me of all those activities, which one I found most rewarding, I would say it would be my time in public service, where I had the privilege to serve as the Undersecretary and Director of the US Patent and Trademark Office, a 200-plus-year-old governmental agency with 13,000 people and an annual budget of $3.4 billion. I had never worked harder, but never had the work been more rewarding and more impactful. Because if you stop back and think about it, there are very few jobs for which your mandate is as noble as do what you think is best for your country. In most cases, one's job is to do what's best for a client, do what's best for a customer or a shareholder. And there are also very few jobs that are as impactful. So policies, rules, and regulations promulgated by government bodies, whether local, state, or federal, have tremendous impact on the lives of so many citizens. And so it was a true honor to have that opportunity to serve in that role, and even more so to have been the first woman and the first person of color to do so in 200 years. So I guess my advice there would be, I'd never thought I would end up in that position. But as you look out in your careers and in your jobs, look and see what needs to be done. And if you find the opportunity to contribute, go for it. And don't wait for somebody who looks just like you to be in that position before you, because if I waited, I still would be waiting. So see what needs to be done, look how you can contribute, and go for it.
Thanks, Michelle. I mean, you highlight that public service work is some of the hardest work that anyone can do, but also the most rewarding. Perhaps you could share with our audience one of the most rewarding experiences that you had in public service?
Ah, um, there were so many, um, but let me share with you and the audience two of them. The first one, because of its historical impact. After much hard work by my team and I at the Patent Office on a trade secret bill, working with congressional leaders, industry associations, colleagues in the White House and other governmental agencies, I had the opportunity to join the president in the Oval Office alongside with bipartisan congressional leaders and the Attorney General of the United States to watch the president sign into law the Defend Trade Secrets Act in 2016. And that certainly, after the hard work and the culmination into passing a piece of legislation, was truly memorable. It was a significant piece of legislation which bolstered trade secret protection in support of innovation. And I was very proud to have played a role in that effort. So that would be one memorable, most memorable moment. I would have to share with you a second one, which is a very personal one. And that is that, again, when I was Undersecretary and Director of the US Patent and Trademark Office, I had the opportunity to represent the United States of America in a diplomatic trip to China, where I met with senior officials from all three branches of the Chinese government. And during that trip, I was invited to meet with the vice premier, who's the #2 ranking official, at the central headquarters in Beijing to discuss important intellectual property policies. And as I was articulating the US's positions on an IP issue, I thought for a moment of my parents back in California when they had bravely left their homeland in China decades ago to move to the United States to build a new life. And I wondered if they ever imagined that their daughter would be one day in such a meeting, in such a role. And I don't think they could or did. And it's because this country's tradition of welcoming immigrants, willing to work hard and embrace its values, that I had such an opportunity. So I was tremendously proud to be able to represent the United States of America at that meeting in that role as an American of Chinese descent.
Oh, that's super inspirational, Michelle. I mean, you mentioned what it must have felt like for your parents to see their daughter in that position. You are also the first woman to be the Undersecretary of Commerce and Director of the USPTO in the history. And you implemented a number of initiatives in the STEM space. Perhaps you could just share with us where that motivation came from and when did you start really considering the effect of women in science and technology?
Yeah, so it really goes back, Bijal, to when I was just beginning my practice as a lawyer. I think I was in my second or third year of law school, and I had gone through the summer associate programs. And at the time that I was a summer associate, when I looked ahead of me at who was in positions in these law firms, let's put it this way, I did not look like them in more ways than one. So also during that time, there was AAPI, Raymond Ocampo. I think many of you know him. He was then the general counsel and senior vice president at Oracle Corporation. And at that time, Oracle was one of the hottest companies. All the law firms wanted to do work for Oracle. And what Ray said was, he said to his outside counsel, I'd like for you to consider staffing my matters with team members from diverse backgrounds. And as a woman and as a minority just coming out of law school, wanting to represent high-tech companies, I was heartened to hear that request from Ray Ocampo. It inspired me, and if I said to myself, if I'm ever in that kind of position, I would want to follow Ray Ocampo's example and give those who might not have the opportunity. And it's why at every step in my career, at my Silicon Valley law firm, at Google, through CHIPS, which I know you know, Bijal, that I helped co-found, at the Patent Office, and now at Amazon, that I've worked hard to expand opportunities for women, and not just women, but underrepresented minority groups in our profession and in the technical fields. It's really being given the opportunity to shine. And if you shine, everybody benefits. And if it didn't work out, that's okay. You learned something about yourself and somebody learned something about you, and you move on.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. You you've been fortunate to be such a role model for so many of us here in Silicon Valley, and you've spent a lot of time as an Asian American leader in Silicon Valley. Just reflecting back on your career, do you feel that you've had any challenges in being a leader because you were Asian American? And is it important that more Asian Americans are in leadership positions? Why?
Yeah, so as we all know, the numbers are not great for women, for AAPIs and other minorities, not only in the leadership positions in the Silicon Valley, but also on Wall Street, in Hollywood, in politics and beyond. And what I would say is we all have our ups and downs and challenges along the way. When I was an in-house counsel leading a particularly high stakes patent litigation, and things were getting tough, as you know, Bijal, as a patent litigator, they sometimes do. One of the senior executives said to another, "I want a fire eating and breathing litigator." The implication being that I was not quite what he had in mind. And at first, I didn't know how to process that. Mind you, I wasn't even the trial lawyer, but the in-house strategist with deep litigation experience. And I asked myself, was there something about my strategy that should have been different, perhaps more aggressive? And the answer was no. He pointed to nothing in my strategy that was inadequate, but rather he had an image of what he thought he needed as his interests were being squeezed, and I didn't fit that image. So he got somebody else to handle the case. And what I learned from this is that all of us have biases, implicit and explicit, and that we really need to work hard to keep them in check, whether that's in the assignment of key projects, promotions, evaluations, or hirings. And to the extent that we have a more diverse group of folks in leadership, people who are able to spot these biases and who have the power and the willingness and the fortitude to intervene, organizations are much better at keeping their biases in check to the benefit of all. So diversity of all sorts in leadership, but not just in leadership, throughout an organization is critically important.
Yes, you're absolutely right, Michelle. I mean, it's important because it's the right thing to do, and it also achieves a better result. So in Silicon Valley, there's this term that we use these days, resilient leadership. Have you heard of the term? What does it mean to you?
That's a good one. So resilient leadership means dealing with the hand you are dealt as a leader, defining what needs to be done, and leading a team to accomplish those goals in spite of any obstacles. And what I would say is, in so doing, as a leader, it means actively seeking input from all, but particularly those with views different from your own. It also means having the humility to listen to a broader range of stakeholders, if you're in the public sector, or customers, if you're in the private sector, all of whom have legitimate and sometimes competing or conflicting points of view. It also means having the humility and the intelligence to listen and learn from your team members, whether they are above or below you, and really welcoming good ideas from wherever and whomever they may come from. And if you're in the public sector, having the humility and the intelligence to listen and to learn from the incredibly talented and dedicated team of professional civil servants who really form the backbone of the running of our government, and who often know more about how to achieve successful outcomes than any recent political appointee. And then after seeking and listening to that input, making a decisive decision informed by the data and that input received, and being able to communicate that clearly and compellingly. And if you do that, then as a leader, you're able to build consensus and achieve buy-in to achieve your goals. And I think, particularly as I experienced in the public sector, for complex policy issues in which there are competing interests and demands, people generally understand that they cannot get all of what they want. But by running that process, which is inclusive, transparent, and objective, you build the consensus that you need for buy-in, and also you motivate a team to accomplish those goals. So those are critical elements, not just of a private sector leader, but also a public sector leader. But I would say it's even more important for a public sector leader because of the impact of the decisions on such a wide range of citizens and individuals, and also because of the criticality of maintaining public trust. So really important for public sector leaders. And lastly, this sounds completely obvious, but the ability to inspire a team to accomplish a goal. Every leader needs that. In the case of leading in the public sector, what I learned is that civil servants are incredibly mission driven. Many of them could be working in the private sector, but choose to work in the public sector. So if you tap into that sense of mission, that shared sense of mission, and if you explain how the goal you wish to achieve fulfills that mission, and how each team member's actions contribute to the goal, there's really nothing that you can't achieve. So those leadership skills probably pertain to both private and public sector, but again, very relevant in the public sector. So there you have some of my thoughts on what it means to be a resilient leader
Thank you.
in both settings.
I'm sure our audience is taking copious notes. I know that I was, because there's still so much more that we can accomplish. Thank you for sharing your thoughts, Michelle. I'm just going to turn to the Facebook questions that we have. It seems to be a lot of very interesting questions. One of them has to do with this idea of giving back to the community. And I've been fortunate to witness this firsthand with you, Michelle, and the other co-founders. But perhaps you could just tell us a little bit about CHIPS and how what inspired that and what the effects have been. Because perhaps, us living in Silicon Valley, we take it for granted that we're innovative in trying to find solutions to social issues.
Yeah, so how long ago did I found CHIPS? It must have been at least 15 years ago, but it's something that of all my outside activities, it's one of the activities that I am most proud about. And I never ever thought in my wildest dreams that it would be as successful as it was. And keep in mind, this was well before the Me Too movement, well before the Silicon Valley tech issues came out. I mean, we operate in the roles that we operate, and we look around and we see what's needed. And when I was the head of patents and patent strategy at Google, I looked around, and as I said, there were not a lot of people who looked like me in more ways than one. And so I tried to find people who looked just like me, and there were just a small handful of women who were in similar roles at major companies. And we said, you know what? And we turned to each other for advice and support and guidance and camaraderie. And then out of that group of 7 incredible ladies, we formed CHIPS, which is designed to promote the advancement of women in technology, business, and policy. And it grew from, I think, the 7 of us to thousands worldwide. And that I am so happy about, because it means that there was a need that we fulfilled, and we really try to mentor and develop individuals wherever they may be, from earlier in their careers to later in their careers, on some of the challenges we faced and how we overcame them. Each one of us overcame our challenges differently, but hopefully out of that they can draw inspiration and guidance to go and seek whatever opportunities they wish to seek. And everybody's goals are different, but hopefully in that group, we've given at least some confidence to go out and pursue that.
It's an amazing shared community. I know, being the first male member who attended the conference, that it's really left a lasting legacy in the IP world and tech world generally, globally. So thank you so much for doing that.
Well, thank you for your support of that group.
Let me just look at some of the other questions on Facebook here. Perhaps you could just go into some more detail on your transition from engineering to law and what led to that.
Well, I think I touched upon it, or I covered some of it. You asked me at the start, Bijal, whether or not I imagined that my career would take the path that it did. And I didn't. I mean, I grew up in the Silicon Valley. My dad was an engineer. All the dads on the street that I grew up on were engineers. So that's kind of what I was going to do. But what happens in life is you get put in situations, you learn things, you look around you, and you see the opportunity to contribute that which you have to that which needs help. And so in the case of law, engineering to law, right, I saw an opportunity where those with a good understanding of technology and innovation and how it happens can contribute to an area that was very important. I mean, the development of laws have tremendous impact on society. The rules that were being decided by courts where there was no case law on point, courts would need guidance on how to best guide their rulings to optimal outcome from society. And so that's really what motivated me to go from engineering to law. And then again, from law to government. I didn't imagine that I'd be in government, but you see the opportunity to shape and influence. And anything that you've done in the past is never wasted, right? If you apply yourself, you become expert in areas, every job that you go to or every role that you then take, you bring together the benefit of all those prior experiences. And I think right now, one of the reasons why it's not that I'm any smarter than anybody else, but one of the reasons why I'm able to add value in certain contexts is because I've seen things from different perspectives. So what I would encourage folks to do who are listening is that, as you look at your careers, learn as much as you can wherever you may be. You may think that you'll be in that position or role forever. You may be, but more likely than not, you'll see opportunities where your background and your experience will allow you to offer insights in new areas that you'll be able to contribute and make a difference in. And that could be in the private sector, or it can be in public service as well. And just be open to that. Be open to change. Be willing to move where you can add the greatest value.
Thank you, Michelle. We're nearing the end of our session. I believe we've answered all of the questions on the Zoom chat. So I wanted to just leave you with perhaps any final remarks. I know for myself, I've learned a lot, and it's quite inspiring to know that you can leave your mark in so many different areas, right? In science, in business, in public sector, in private sector. There's just so many things that we can do with the short amount of time that we have on this planet to leave our mark. Anything you want to leave for our audience?
Yeah, so that I just want to pick up on that point exactly, Bijal. You have one life to lead, and think about what needs to be done in this world to make it a better place, and think about how you can make that impact. And it's different for each one of us. And think at the end of your life, when you're looking back on it, how will you want that life story to be written? And if you think about the world in that manner, I think that offers a great deal of clarity and guidance as we get stuck in the day-to-day demands. It has served for me as a guiding North Star in what I do. And it's a journey. So enjoy the journey, appreciate all the people who support you along the way, because at the end of the day, it's not just the end destination, it's all the wonderful relationships and people who support you along the way. And I have so many of those wonderful supporters in the AAPI community and at APAICS, and just be grateful for the opportunity to contribute. It's a pleasure, and we each have them, and that would be the last bit of advice that I would leave to our listeners as they think about things in the year or years ahead. So thank you. Thank you for having me on today.
Thank you so much, Michelle and Madeline.
Thank you so much for joining us today in our APAICS in Conversation, Bijal and Michelle. It's been a pleasure to have you both on. And to our audience, thank you for joining us. I also just wanted to make sure that those listening, we have our Legislative Leadership Series panel coming up this week on Wednesday, the 12th at 2 p.m. Eastern. It's a conversation on health access. And so I think it's going to be a pretty dynamic one, and I hope you can register onto the website at apaics.org, and I look forward to seeing you the next time. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.